The aim of practicing Nippon Kendo Kata is to study the principles and logic of the katana and improve technique in order to build character. By practicing the kata over and over again, one can learn proper etiquette and demeanor, understand the principles of the katana, and learn the reasons and logic of attack and defense. One can also develop a commanding presence and learn to read the opponent's mind and master the principles of kendo. When practicing the techniques, it's important to understand the rationale behind Nippon Kendo Kata. Let's go through the entire sequence from entrance to exit. Uchidachi and Shidachi bow to the kamiza, and with Uchidachi leading, proceed to the zare position. With back straight, they walk using suriashi towards the zare position in a dignified manner. The zare should ideally be performed at the center of the shimoza. Uchidachi and Shidachi stand 3 steps apart, facing each other, and drawing the left foot back, sit in seiza. The tsuba should be aligned with the knee. They simultaneously place both hands on the floor and slowly lower their heads. They then pick up their katana and, standing together, proceed to the Tachiai no Ma position about 9 steps apart. Shidachi lowers the knee furthest from the kamiza and places the kodachi on the floor. Shidachi then proceeds to the Tachiai no Ma. They turn to the kamiza and perform a standing bow. They then face each other and exchange bows. Switching the katana to their left hands, they take 3 large steps forward, starting with the right foot, and assume the Sonkyo position in Migi Shizentai. They draw their swords and cross the tips at around the yokote of the blade. They stand and assume Chudan no Kamae. They then lower the tips of their swords to release the kamae and return to the Tachiai no Ma position. There they adopt Chudan, the kata for the tachi or long sword. Ippon me. Both assume Jodan and advance as they try to seize the sen or initiative. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen, that is, recognizing the start of Uchidachi's attack and immediately taking the initiative and making an attack. Nihonme. Both assume Chudan and advance as they try to seize the sen. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen. Sanbonme. From Gedan, they advance and try to seize the sen. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen. Yonhonme. From the yin-yang kamae, where Uchidachi assumes hasso and Shidachi wakigamae, they move forward. Shidachi wins by go no sen, a counterattack. 5本目. Uchidachi assumes Jodan and Shidachi Chudan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Sensen no Sen. Ropponme. Uchidachi assumes Chudan and Shidachi Gedan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Go no Sen. Nanahonme. Both assume Chudan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Go no Sen. After finishing the Tachi no Kata, they assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then return to their original positions. Holding their swords with their right hands, they bow to each other. Uchidachi continues to hold his sword in the right hand and assumes the Sonkyo position while waiting for Shidachi to exchange the Tachi for the Kodachi, or short sword. Uchidachi stands when Shidachi starts to return to the Tachi no Ma position. After bowing to each other, they switch their swords over to their left hands and move forward, starting with the right foot. They assume the Sonkyo position, draw their swords and cross the tips. They stand and assume Chudan no Kamae, then lower their swords to release the Kamae, returning to the Tachi no Ma position. Kodachi no Kata, 1本目. Nihonme. Sanbonme. After finishing the Kodachi no Kata, they assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then stand and return to their original positions. Holding their swords with their right hands, they bow to each other. They then bow to the kamiza. Shidachi steps back to retrieve the tachi, while uchidachi proceeds to the zarei position. Shidachi holds both swords and proceeds to the zarei position. After performing zarei, they pick up their swords and stand. Shidachi makes way for uchidachi, then follows uchidachi out of the dojo. In Kendo Kata, you must always walk in suriashi, with your back straight, look straight in front of you. Your left hand should be placed slightly towards the center of your body and should remain stationary. This is how to hold the tachi and kodachi. Hold the kodachi with your right thumb and index finger, and place the tachi between the index finger and remaining fingers. When kneeling, lower the left knee first. With the jimbu or blade edge turned towards you, place the katana on your right side. The tsuba should be aligned with your knee. Sit in seiza and look at your opponent. Place both hands on the floor simultaneously and lower your head. Stand right leg first and proceed to the Tachi Ai no Ma position. From the Tachi Ai no Ma, Shidachi takes about 5 steps back and lowers the knee facing Shimoza and places the Kodachi on the floor. Hold the katana right below the tsuba with your right hand. The angle should be about 45 degrees. The rei or bow to the kamiza should be at an angle of about 30 degrees. Rei is a way to pay respect and should be done sincerely and not just as a matter of form. The rei to each other is a slight bow at an angle of about 15 degrees. It should be done in silence while contemplating the opponent. In the case of a bokuto, bring it to the center of your body and switch it over to your left hand with the thumb on the tsuba to hold it against your body. The tsukugashira, the bottom of the hilt, should come to your center line. In the case of a habiki or real sword, place your right thumb on the tsuba and simultaneously hold the kojiri with your left hand to insert the katana in your obi, so that the tsuba comes to the front of your navel. When assuming the sonkyo position, draw your left foot towards your right. While assuming sonkyo, draw your katana in an upward arc and cross swords at the yokote. Be sure not to swing the sword overhead. The sword should be crossed at the yokote. The yokote is indicated here. When releasing the kamae, the kenseng, or tip of the sword, should be lowered to about 3 or 6 centimeters below your opponent's knee. It should be pointing slightly to the left of your opponent's body. The chudan no kamae is the most fundamental of all stances, or kamae, in kendo. With the right foot forward, bring your left fist in front of the navel, leaving a distance of about 1 closed fist. The base of the left thumb should be at navel height. The toes of both feet should be pointing forward. The feet should be about a fist apart, with the tip of the left foot aligned with the right ankle. Grasp the bokuto from above with your left hand and wrap your little finger around the tsukugashira. In the case of a habiki, the left hand should generally grasp the tsuka above the makidome, while the right hand is positioned slightly below the tsuba. Both should stand at issoku itto no mae, a distance that enables them to strike by taking 1 step forward, or evade a strike by taking 1 step backward. The kensen should be pointed along an invisible line extending from the base of the tsuba through the kisaki to between the eyes or the left eye. Let's look at the main points of the tachi and kodachi. Ipponme. Both assume jodan and advance towards each other. Uchidachi strikes shomen, but Shidachi averts this and strikes back at shomen. Shidachi then raises the sword to morote hidari jodan and shows zanshin. After allowing Shidachi plenty of time to show zanshin, Uchidachi straightens up and assumes chudan. For morote hidari jodan, step forward with your left and stand in hidari shizentai. The left fist is about a closed fist away and above the left forehead. The kenseng is pointing upwards and back at an angle of about 45 degrees, slightly towards the right. For morote migi jodan, bring your left fist in front and above your forehead at a distance of about 1 fist. The kenseng is pointing upwards and back at an angle of about 45 degrees and should be aligned with your center line. It's important that Uchidachi show enough kigamae to deliver a fast and strong men cut through the tsuka of Shidachi's sword. When Uchidachi's attack misses and swings through the air, Uchidachi loses balance slightly and leans forward, but still maintains eye contact. After delivering the strike, the kensen should be no lower than gedan. Shidachi steps back to evade the attack, and without pause counters with a strike with the monouchi of the blade. Shidachi forces Uchidachi back with the feeling of thrusting at the face and displays zanshin. Uchidachi draws the sword back before delivering the strike. The strike fails to reach shomen. The left foot is not drawn up properly. Shidachi has drawn the sword back too much. The kenseng is below fist level. There's a slight pause between the evading of the attack and the counter-strike. Shidachi thrusts the kensen into Uchidachi's face before raising the sword to jodan. Let's take a look at the correct movements from the other side. Nihonme. Both assume chudan and proceed towards each other. Unable to bear the pressure, Uchidachi attempts to strike Shidachi's kote. Uchidachi delivers a strike slightly lower than Shidachi's right kote. Shidachi lowers the kensen to about gedang and steps diagonally back to evade the strike. Then, with a large swing, strikes Uchidachi's kote. The path of the sword should be in a semicircle. Shidachi raises the sword high, so that he has a clear view of Uchidachi from between the arms and delivers one large strike. Zanshin is shown in spirit without any bodily motion. Both assume Chudang. When the sword is lifted overhead for the swing, the kensen is lower than the height of the fist. The downstroke is diagonal. The point at which the kote is made is too high. The point at which the kote is made is too low. Shidachi draws a semicircle with the sword. The strike is diagonal. Let's look at the correct movements. Sanbonme. Both assume gedang and proceed towards each other. Shidachi parries Uchidachi's thrust and immediately thrusts back to the chest. Shidachi closes in on Uchidachi with kuraizume, overpowering Uchidachi without actually thrusting, and raises the kensen to the center of the face to show zanshin. In Gedan no Kamae, the kensen is 3 to 6 centimeters below the opponent's kneecap. When approaching Ma'ai, both raise their swords to Chudang as they try to overwhelm each other with their strength of spirit. Uchidachi seizes the opportunity to strike and turns the blade slightly to the right so that the shinogi is to the left and thrusts at Shidachi's suigetsu or solar plexus. Shidachi turns the body away and tilts the blade slightly to the right using the left shinogi to parry Uchidachi's thrust, and then immediately thrusts back towards Uchidachi's solar plexus. Shidachi presses forward, starting with the left foot, to overwhelm Uchidachi without actually thrusting, and then raises the kensen to the center of Uchidachi's face to show zanshin. The position of the hands is too high. The left foot has not been drawn up properly. When parrying the thrust, the left fist is not on the center line. Shidachi tries to parry and weaken the thrust with the hands without turning the body. It's a double thrust. After pressing forward with kuraizume, Shidachi thrusts the kensen in Uchidachi's face. And now the correct movements. Yonhonme. Uchidachi steps forward in Hasso no Kamae, and Shidachi steps back in Wakigamae. They strike at each other's shomen and cross swords. They naturally assume Chudang. Shidachi dodges Uchidachi's thrust to the right lung by simultaneously raising the left fist above the head and pointing the tip of the sword backward in Makikaishi and strikes Uchidachi's shomen. Shidachi displays zanshin and returns to where they cross swords, stepping back with the right foot first. Let's look at the different kamae. For Hasso no Kamae, take one step forward with your left and bring your sword up to Morote Hidari Jodan. Your left fist is on the centre line. The tsuba is at mouth level about 1 fist away. The sword is pointing backward at an angle of about 45 degrees. The edge of the blade is turned towards shidachi. For wakigamae, turn the body back to the right into hidari hammi. Bring the sword down to below the right armpit in a large motion so that the right fist passes in front of the mouth. The left fist should be positioned at the lower right of the navel. The tip of the sword points backward with the blade turned towards lower right. The kensen should be slightly lower than in gedan no kamae. When assuming the kamae, be sure that uchidachi cannot see the blade of the sword. Both participants extend their arms and strike at each other's shomen in one blow. After crossing swords, uchidachi seizes the opportunity to thrust at shidachi's right lung. Shidachi parries the thrust and raises the sword overhead so that the blade points to the rear in makikaishi and strikes uchidachi's shomen in a single motion. Uchidachi's kensen should be slightly below level, with the edge of the blade turned to the right. Shidachi parries uchidachi's thrust by stepping to the left and raises the sword overhead so that the blade points to the rear in makikaishi. The timing is very important. If after crossing swords the ma'ai is too close, uchidachi retreats slightly. After receiving shidachi's makikaishi, uchidachi will lose balance slightly and will lean forward, but continues to maintain eye contact. The point at which their swords cross is too high. They should be crossing swords at chudan with such force as if to grind the shinogi of each other's swords. The right foot is not positioned properly behind the left. The kensen is too high and is not thrusting at the right lung. After thrusting, uchidachi fails to maintain eye contact. Let's review the correct movements. Gohonme. Uchidachi assumes jodan and shidachi chudan as they move towards each other. Uchidachi strikes shomen as if to cut through to shidachi's chin. Shidachi deflects the blow by swinging the sword upward with suriage, as if drawing an arc with the tip of the sword, and strikes uchidachi's shomen in a single motion. Shidachi lowers the kensen to uchidachi's face, steps back with the right foot, and raises the sword to morote hidari jodan to show zanshin. As uchidachi raises the sword to jodan, shidachi steps forward with the right foot and presses the kensen against uchidachi's left fist and assumes chudan. Uchidachi strikes shidachi's shomen as if to cut down to the chin. Shidachi deflects this blow using the left side of the sword, swinging it upwards with hidari suriage, making sure that the kensen does not point down. In a single motion, shidachi follows with a strike. Shidachi is deflecting the strike with a harai technique instead of suriage. The kensen is lower than both fists. Shidachi points the kensen to the center of uchidachi's face and steps back with the right foot to show zanshin. And now for the correct movements. Ropponme. Uchidachi takes Chudang and Shidachi Gedang. They move towards each other, and after an initial engagement, Uchidachi delivers a kote strike. Shidachi deflects this with suriage and strikes kote. Shidachi then shows zanshin. Both move from their right foot and assume Chudang, returning to the position at which they cross swords. Uchidachi takes Chudang and Shidachi Gedang. As they approach Mae, Shidachi puts pressure on Uchidachi by raising the Kensen as if to strike Uchidachi's fists. Just as their swords are about to cross, Uchidachi raises the sword in Morote Hidari Jodang and prevents Shidachi from pursuing the attack. As Uchidachi attempts to strike a small kote, Shidachi raises the sword in a small arc and with one motion strikes Uchidachi's right kote. Instead of coming face to face with Shidachi, Uchidachi, turning the blade diagonally to the right and lowering the kensang, steps back diagonally to the left. With the right shinogi, Shidachi deflects Uchidachi's strike with suriage, as if drawing a small arc with the sword, and in one motion strikes kote. Uchidachi uses a harai technique instead of suriage. Uchidachi is face to face with Shidachi when stepping back. Let's take another look at the correct movements. Nana Homme. Both assume Chudang. Shidachi receives Uchidachi's thrust by thrusting forwards and upwards and then returns to Chudang. Shidachi then avoids Uchidachi's strike to Shomen by moving to the side and strikes Uchidachi's right door. From Wakigamai, Shidachi swings the sword overhead while turning to the left and faces Uchidachi. Both then return to the position where they first crossed swords in Ayumiyashi. Uchidachi seizes the opportunity and, taking a small step forward, thrusts at Shidachi's chest while twisting the sword shinogi into Shidachi's sword. Uchidachi then steps forward with the left, then right foot to strike Shidachi's shomen. After Shidachi evades the strike, Uchidachi's balance is slightly broken. Uchidachi then recovers the balance and swings the sword up, coming face to face with Shidachi. When receiving Uchidachi's thrust, Shidachi's monouchi should be at about shoulder height. As Uchidachi steps forward with the left, then right foot to strike shomen, Shidachi moves to the side while maintaining eye contact and strikes Uchidachi's right door. Upon finishing the strike, Shidachi is on the right knee. The right arm and sword should be parallel to the floor. After a slight pause, Shidachi then assumes wakigamai and shows zanshin. The point at which the swords cross is too high and lacks spirit. Uchidachi swings the sword up after Shidachi assumes wakigamai. Now for the correct movements. Having finished the Tachi no Kata, both assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then return to their original positions. They now remove their swords from their obi. In the case of Bokuto, the sword is switched over to the right in the center of the body. In the case of a habiki sword, the left hand pushes the sword slightly to the right front. Place the index finger of your right hand over the tsuba, and with your thumb and other fingers, grasp the sword near the koiguchi. Extend your arm and hold the sword by your side. Shidachi steps backwards to where the kodachi was placed. Uchidachi holds the sword in the right hand and waits in the Sonkyo position. Shidachi kneels at the shimoza and exchanges the tachi for the kodachi. Uchidachi stands as Shidachi starts to return to the Tachi Iai no Ma. After exchanging rei, they switch their swords over to their left in taito, and after taking a large step forward with their right, advance to ma'ai and assume the Sonkyo position to cross swords. They both stand. Shidachi places the left hand against the waist, thumb backward. When using a habiki, Shidachi lightly grips the kurigata, thumb forward. From chudang, Shidachi lowers the kenseng and allows the left hand to fall naturally to the side to release the kamae. He then returns to Tachi Iai no Ma. Kodachi no Kata, ipponme. From morote hidari jodan, Uchidachi strikes shomen. Shidachi deflects this by turning slightly to the right with uke nagashi and immediately strikes shomen. Shidachi takes one step back and shows zanshin. Both assume chudang and return to where they first crossed swords. The chudan hanmi no kamae, in response to jodan, is assumed by placing the right foot slightly forward and drawing the left shoulder back. The kensen is at the level of the center of Uchidachi's face. As the two approach ma'ai, Shidachi steps sideways with the aim of entering into irimi. Uchidachi responds by striking shomen in a single motion without first doing a backward movement. Irimi means to apply physical and mental pressure and enter into the opponent's range. Shidachi turns the body to the right and raises the right hand overhead. Gripping the sword lightly, Shidachi deflects the strike with the left shinogi with uke nagashi and strikes shomen. Shidachi uses a light grip and with the blade turned backwards, deflects the blow with uke nagashi and counters, making sure that the point at which the strike is parried is not too low. The uke nagashi technique is not done overhead. Shidachi adopts zanshin automatically without thinking. And now let's review the correct movements. Nihonme. Shidachi presses forward with the aim of entering into irimi. Uchidachi responds by assuming wakigamae and raises the sword overhead to strike shomen. Shidachi deflects this with uke nagashi and strikes shomen. Shidachi then restrains Uchidachi's arm above the elbow and displays zanshin. Uchidachi steps back from the left foot and Shidachi from the right to assume chudang, after which they return to where they first crossed swords. The chudan hanmi no kamae in response to gedang is assumed by placing the right foot slightly forward, drawing back the left shoulder with the kensen at Uchidachi's chest level. From wakigamae, Uchidachi strikes shomen in a single motion. When performing uke nagashi, it's important to raise the right hand overhead and use the right shinogi. Shidachi restrains Uchidachi's arm above the elbow and shows zanshin. At the same time, Shidachi turns the blade down to the right and points the kensen at Uchidachi's throat. When showing zanshin, shidachi closes in too much. Shidachi restrains uchidachi's sword while returning to the original position. Let's review the correct movements. Sanbonme. Shidachi assumes gedan hanmi and moves towards uchidachi, who attacks with a strike to shomen. Shidachi deflects this with suriage, suriotoshi, surinagashi and surikomi. Shidachi then restrains uchidachi's arm above the elbow and shows zanshin. To assume gedan hanmi no kamae, place the right foot slightly forward, draw the left shoulder back, and lower the kensen to the same height as that of the gedan no kamae for the tachi. As the uchidachi steps forward with the right, left and then right, shidachi aims to enter into irimi. This forces uchidachi to raise the sword overhead and strike shomen. Shidachi should conduct the suriage, suriotoshi, surinagashi and surikomi movements correctly. In suriage, shidachi deflects uchidachi's strike by swinging the sword upward as if to draw an arc. In suriotoshi, shidachi slides the sword downwards to the base of uchidachi's tsuba. Surinagashi is conducted straight across from that position at stomach level. In surikomi, shidachi restrains uchidachi's sword by sliding the shinogi down to the base of the tsuba in a twisting motion. As soon as shidachi finishes the surikomi, the wrist is cocked so that both habaki are locked at a right angle. Let's take another look at that entire sequence. When stepping forward with the left foot, the sword is raised overhead. The twisting is overdone and shidachi has come in too close. Shidachi restrains uchidachi's sword while returning to the original position. Now for the correct movements. Finally, let's look at a demonstration of Nippon Kendo Kata using a habiki blade instead of a bokuto. In practicing Kendo Kata, it's important to follow the protocol before and after Tachiai, and master all 5 kamae for the tachi, and also the kodachi hammi no kamae. Uchidachi and shidachi should understand each other's roles and work in harmony, with uchidachi always initiating the action. In tachi no kata, uchidachi strikes upon seeing the right opportunity, whereas in kodachi no kata, uchidachi strikes in response to shidachi's intent to enter into irimo. It's essential to understand the reasons and logic behind this. Uchidachi should aim to strike or thrust from the fundamental spatial distance of Issoku Ito no Ma'ai, while shidachi should aim to strike and thrust accurately with the mono uchi. When showing zanshin, regardless of whether it involves physical action, it's important to display strength or a commanding presence.
In 1969, the All Japan Kendo Federation established a set of 7 Iai forms incorporated from various schools, and added 3 new forms in 1980, resulting in a set of 10. In the year 2000, 2 new forms were added to the set. Let's take a look at the 2 new forms. First, 11本目総切り. (12本目抜き打ち). This video introduces the main points of each of the 12 forms, comparing common mistakes with the correct movements. There's also a model demonstration at the end, which expresses kiken tai ichi, an ideal state achieved when the spirit, sword, and body are united in harmony. Take the keito shise or formal standing position, holding the sword in your left hand, and wait for the signal to enter. Transfer the sword to your right hand and bow to the shinza, a sacred place in the dojo. Transfer the sword to your left hand. Spread out the hakama gently from left to right with your right hand and kneel in place with the left knee first. The shinza should be to your upper left. Place the sword on the floor sideways before you so that the edge of the blade is turned outward. Focus your mind on the sword and bow towards it. You are now one with the sword. Grasp the sword with your right hand, placing your thumb on the tsuba or guard. With your left hand, pick up the sword near the kojiri or the end of the scabbard, and secure the sword in your sash to assume the position of seiza taito, the formal sitting position with a sword in the sash. Focus all your attention on a point on the floor about 4 or 5 meters ahead in enzan no metsuke, as if you are looking out over a distant hill. Let's take a look at the main points of the 12 basic forms. Grip the tsuka lightly near the tsuba with your right hand, and with your left, grip it near the tsukagashira so that your little finger doesn't go over the makidome. Hold the sword securely with the last 2 fingers of both hands and relax the other fingers. Grip the tsuka lightly as if it were an egg. 1本目前. Your opponent is sitting facing you. When you sense that he's about to attack, draw your sword and cleave his temple. Follow immediately with a downstroke. While rising, bring the sword up and then swing it down in the kesa style to perform chiburi. Align your rear foot with the front and then draw your right foot back. Extend your right elbow and replace the blade in the saya. At the same time, lower your rear knee to the floor. Rise and simultaneously align the rear foot with the front and assume taito shise. And now the main points of 1本目. When striking your opponent's temple, make sure that the saya is pushed way back. Bring the sword up close to your left ear and over your head, as if to thrust to the rear. The sword should be parallel to the floor. On completion of the downstroke, the kisaki is slightly lowered. At the end of the chiburi action, the kisaki is pointing downwards at an angle of about 45 degrees. 2本目後ろ. Assume that an adversary is sitting behind you. When you sense he's about to attack, seize the initiative by turning back and cleave his temple. Follow with a downstroke. Rise and bring the sword up, arc the blade down and outward in the chiburi action. Let's look at the main points of 2本目. Draw the sword while turning back. Cleave your opponent's temple as soon as you face him. The movement of the feet is the reverse of 1本目. 3本目受け流し. When an adversary sitting at your left attacks suddenly, deflect his blow while rising and deal a slanting downwards counterstroke. Open the right hand and re-grip the tsuka with the same hand, palm downwards using a backhand grip, and replace the sword in the saya. At the same time, lower your rear knee to the floor. Let's look at the main points of 3本目. Turn to the attacker and draw the sword over your head to protect the body. Draw your left foot back and deal a slanting downward stroke. Stop your left fist at the navel. The kisaki should only be slightly lowered. Let's take another look at 3本目受け流し. (4本目使当て. you are sitting in Iai Hiza facing an opponent with another adversary behind you. When you sense their intention to attack, strike the front opponent in the solar plexus with the tsuka. Draw your sword and pierce the rear opponent in the solar plexus. Then strike the front attacker with a downstroke. Let's look at the main points of 4本目. Strike the adversary precisely in the solar plexus with the tsukagashira. Hold the koiguchi with your left hand and bring it towards your navel. Straighten the right elbow and thrust the opponent behind you. Withdraw the blade and raise the sword high above your head. Face the front and deliver the downstroke. While replacing the blade in the saya, draw the right foot back to the left and take the sonkyo position with the left knee on the floor. 5本目, けさ切り. You're advancing when suddenly an adversary attacks from the fore. Strike upwards at an angle and execute a return diagonal downstroke. Take the hassou position for zanshin. And now for a look at the main points of 5本目. When striking your opponent with an upward diagonal stroke, your right fist should come up slightly above your right shoulder. Take the hassou position for zanshin. Grasp the koiguchi with the left hand and simultaneously arc the blade down and outward to perform chiburi. 6本目, もろ手突き. You're advancing when suddenly you sense an attack by 3 adversaries from the front and rear. First, cleave the right-hand side of the front opponent's face and deliver a double-handed thrust to his solar plexus. Turn back to face the rear opponent and deliver a downstroke. Turn and face the third opponent coming at you from the front and execute a downstroke. Perform chiburi to the right and return the sword to the saya, maintaining the same position. Let's look at the main points of 6本目. When striking the right-hand side of the front opponent's face, cleave down to his chin. Lower the sword to the chudan position and firmly pierce his solar plexus. Withdraw the sword, turn, and raise it over your head in the warding-off style. 7本目, 三方切り. You're advancing when you sense an attack from the front, right, and left. Bear down upon them and draw your sword. First, cleaving the right opponent, and then deliver a downstroke to the left opponent. Follow with a downstroke to the front. Draw your right foot back and assume morote hidari jodan to indicate zanshin. Arc the sword down and outward to perform chiburi. And now for the main points of 7本目. When striking the right opponent, cleave down to his chin. Turn and face the left and immediately follow with a downstroke. Turning to the front, raise the sword in ukenagashi and execute a downstroke, ending with your sword parallel to the ground. Let's compare the sword path of 7本目 to that of 6本目. In 6本目 morotezuki, the blade cuts diagonally to the right. Whereas in 7本目, it cuts straight down from the top. When turning, make sure to pivot on your toes. And now let's look at 7本目三本切り performed at normal speed. 8本目、顔面当て. You're advancing when you sense an attack from the front and rear. Thrust the tsuka into the front opponent's face. Turn and pierce the rear opponent in the solar plexus. And then turn to the front to deliver a downstroke. Let's look at the main points of 8本目. Step forward with your right foot and at the same time thrust your entire sword, saya and all, into your opponent's face and strike him fiercely between the eyes with the tsukagashira. When piercing the solar plexus of your rear opponent, make sure that your right fist is properly positioned above your right hip and thrust immediately. 9本目、添え手突き. While advancing, you sense an attack. Seize the initiative and execute a diagonal downstroke from the right. Pierce your opponent's stomach, supporting the blade with your left hand. Without moving your left hand, withdraw the blade and take up a stance with the blade lowered, indicating zanshin. Let's look at the main points. After executing the diagonal downstroke from the right, your right fist should be level with your navel, with the kisaki slightly higher than the fist. When piercing, place the center of the blade firmly between your left thumb and index finger. Your right fist should be above your right hip. From this position, pierce with the left hand supporting the blade. When indicating zanshin, be sure that your right elbow is not bent and that your right fist is not as high as your right breast. 10本目、四方切り. While advancing, you sense that you're surrounded by adversaries on four sides. Seize initiative and use the tsuka to strike the right fist of the upper right opponent just as he's about to draw his sword. Draw your sword and turn your upper body counterclockwise to pierce the solar plexus of the second opponent behind you to your left. Then perform a downstroke to the first opponent in front of you to the right. Then to the third one behind you to the right, and finally to the fourth one to your upper left. Draw back your right foot and assume morote hidari jodan for zanshin. Swing your sword down and outward in chiburi. The main points of 10本目. When striking with the tsuka, give a hard and accurate thrust with the flat of the tsuka. After drawing the sword, press the mune or ridge of the monouchi against your left breast. Your right fist should be far from your body. When piercing, bring your left hand towards your navel while continuing to hold the koiguchi. At the same time, tuck your elbows in. Assume the wakiganmae position with the sword lowered at your side, and then raise it overhead. Let's take a look at 10本目四方切り at normal speed. And now for the newly established form 11本目総切り. While advancing, you sense an attack from in front. Seize initiative and execute a diagonal downward stroke to the left-hand side of your opponent's face, right shoulder, and left-hand side of the trunk. Cleave sideways between the hip and waist and execute a downward stroke. Perform chiburi to the right and return the sword to the saya, maintaining the same position. Now a closer look at the main points. Note the angle at which the diagonal downstrokes are delivered. When raising the sword above the head, the right hand should be towards the right rather than directly above the center line. Deliver the diagonal downstrokes, first to the left-hand side of the face down to the chin, then the right shoulder down to the solar plexus, and finally from below the left arm down to the navel. Before cleaving across the trunk between the hip and waist, both hands should be positioned around the left hip. Without any delay, strike the right-hand side of the trunk between the hip and waist and cleave straight across. This technique makes it possible to respond to a frontal attack from more than one adversary. The important thing is not to pause between the strikes. This can only be done through skillful positioning of the body, agile footwork, and good breathing. A lot of thought must be given to the use of the hands and the path of the blade. Junihonme nukiuchi. Your opponent is standing facing you. Suddenly he draws his sword and attacks. Step back to evade the strike while drawing your sword above your head and deliver a downstroke. Step back towards the left with your right foot and perform chiburi to the right. Return the sword to the saya, maintaining the same position. And now for the main points. In order to evade your opponent's strike, you must take a big step back with your left and move your body. Raise your sword high above your head and immediately deliver a downstroke, ending with your sword parallel to the floor. When raising your sword overhead, your right hand should be above the center line. Assume taito shise and step forward with your right and return to your original position. Let's take another look at Junihonme nukiuchi. And now watch the actions after the practice. Sit in the correct position, remove the sword from your sash, first halfway with your left hand, and then completely with your right hand and set it upright in front of your right knee. Lay it down quietly to the left with the edge facing inwards so that it's now lying across in front of you. Bow to the sword and then stand it up in the center with the edge facing inwards. Slide your left hand down near the kojiri. Hold the sword in your left hand and stand up, aligning your rear foot with the front. Assume the formal standing position, sword in the left hand. Transfer the sword to your right hand and bow to the shinza. Transfer the sword to your left and assume the formal standing position once again. Step back a couple of steps starting with your left foot, turn clockwise and exit. And now let's look at some of the common mistakes that are likely to be made and how to remedy them. 1本目前 When striking at the adversary's temple, the kisaki is too low. The kisaki should only be slightly lower than your right shoulder. When raising the sword overhead, the fists and kisaki are too low. The sword should be parallel to the floor. If the sword is held this way, the kisaki becomes too low. Slightly tighten the hold of the little finger of your left hand. When raising the sword overhead, turn the wrist slightly inwards, raising the blade close to the left ear as if to thrust to the rear. On completion of the downstroke, your left fist should be level with your navel, the kisaki slightly lowered. On completion of chiburi, the kisaki is too high. The right fist should be level with the left, with the kisaki pointing downwards at an angle of about 45 degrees. Nihonme ushiro. The sword was drawn after turning to face your opponent. This is too late. Strike as soon as you face your opponent. At the time of cleaving, the rear foot is not in parallel to the front foot. The rear foot should lie in parallel to the left foot. 3本目受け流し The posture is rather unsteady. Distribute your weight evenly on both feet to maintain your balance. The kisaki is too low. When executed correctly, the left hand should stop at the navel with the kisaki slightly lowered. Yon honme tsukate. When striking your opponent, the tsukagashira is too high. The tsukagashira should be aimed at your opponent's solar plexus. At the time of striking, the rear foot was turned inwards and was not in parallel to the right foot. The rear foot should lie in parallel to the right foot. When piercing the rear adversary, the upper body is unsteady. Be careful not to turn too far. Straighten your right elbow and bring your right fist close to your body. 5本目けさ切り When cleaving your opponent with an upward diagonal stroke, do not lean forward. Steady yourself and strike upwards at an acute angle. Note the timing of the downstroke. There should be no pause between the upper diagonal stroke and the downstroke. Execute both strokes in one continuous movement. "6本目もろ手突き The drawing of the sword and the cleaving must be done in one continuous action. As soon as the blade leaves the saya, its kisaki strikes the opponent. When drawing the sword, the upper body is not turned enough to the front. Turn the upper body and maintain a steady stance. When thrusting at the solar plexus, the kisaki is too high. Thrust as if you are pressing down the kisaki. 7本目三本切り Drawing the sword and the cleaving must be one continuous action. Here the sword is raised above the head before the downstroke. This is not a vertical stroke. Draw and strike almost simultaneously. Make sure the kisaki is firm. Here, the kisaki is too low on delivering downstrokes to the left and front opponents. The left fist should be level with the navel, and the sword should be parallel to the floor. The tsukagashira is too low. The tsukagashira should be targeted precisely between the eyes. When turning to face your rear opponent, make sure that your feet are in parallel. Turn the right heel outwards so that you are directly facing the enemy. When piercing the rear opponent's solar plexus, the sword should not be parallel to the ground. The kisaki should be pointing at your opponent's solar plexus. Bring your right fist in so that it's slightly lower than the kisaki. 9本目添え手突き. The drawing of the sword and cleaving was not done in one continuous movement. Make sure that the kisaki does not lose its speed. Draw and go straight on to the cleaving action. When piercing the adversary's stomach, the kisaki is too high. The sword should be level with your waist and parallel to the ground. 10本目四方切り. When surrounded by opponents on four sides, it's no use performing each stroke accurately if the action isn't continuous. Let's look at the correct way. The strokes are precise, the action continuous, and there's a sense of rhythm to the movement. When piercing the enemy behind you to your left, be sure not to bend the elbow in this manner. Turn halfway, straighten the elbow, and pierce. "11本目総切り. Let's look at the correct way. When raising the sword above the head, the right hand should not come directly above the center line. The right hand should be towards the right rather than directly above the center line in order to deflect the opponent's attack. When raising the sword above the head, be careful not to wave it around. The kisaki should remain pointing in the direction of the downward stroke. Do not use tsugiashi when delivering the downward stroke. Advance in okuriashi. After cleaving diagonally down from under the opponent's left arm, your left hand has crossed your navel. Upon finishing the downstroke, the left hand should stop at the navel. Note the height of both wrists when cleaving straight across the right hip and waist. The wrists are too high. The wrist should be above the left-hand side of your waist. Let's take a close look at how the trunk is cut straight across. And now for another look at 11本目, bearing in mind the main points. 12本目抜き打ち. Let's see how it's done properly. It's important to take a big step back to evade the enemy's strike while simultaneously drawing your sword and raising it above your head to deliver the downstroke. There should be no pause between the raising of the sword and the downstroke. The idea is to evade your opponent's strike and attack before he recovers, so no time should be lost between the raising of the sword and the downstroke. Upon finishing the downstroke, the sword should be parallel to the floor. Bearing in mind these points, let's take another look at 12本目. Finally, let's observe a model example of Iai, a combination of mind, sword, and body. In order to improve your Iai, it's essential to have an understanding of the underlying principles of the sword and to aim for a perfect unification of mind, spirit, and movement. It's important to master proper breathing and the overall use of the hands to develop sword technique. We hope that all Kendoists will come to love Iai and make it part of their training to progress both in Kendo and Iai, and that the All Japan Kendo Federation Iai will become even more widespread than it is today.